How we perceive our universe, our life, is dependent upon our mind. Therefore, understanding the mind is crucial in our attempts to understand life and how we respond to life and how we live our lives. So, this is what I consider as the spirituality. Our perception of our universe and how we perceive life as it is the secret to me to healthy aging. My name is Vaikunthan Rajaratnam. I'm a hand surgeon, medical educator, instructional designer, lifelong learner, and an unaccredited philosopher. I'd like to share with you my experience over the last 5 decades with the 4 major religions in the world, plus the last decade pontificating and thinking about life and our belief systems and how it affects us. I think this is the secret to the success of life, and I would like to share with you. Come and join me in this journey. So, my disclaimer thus far is that these are my beliefs and thoughts, and they are based on my practice of 4 decades of the 4 major religions. And my views constantly change depending on what the situation is in terms of the evidence. A lot of what I'm going to share today is based on facts that are shown and proven in the realms of science, which is what the truth is in my perspective. So in the first phase, we must try to understand the mind. As I said, the mind is the most crucial element through which we understand our universe and therefore life. There are 4 functions to the mind. One has been shown in neuroscience, is the sensory motor component. We perceive our universe based on the 5 senses, from which we then process that information and create knowledge and our perceptions of what the universe is. These can be biased by our prior knowledge, which can be previous encounters, teachings, and beliefs. And this is dependent upon the memory. So once we receive the stimulus, we process it, we go back to memory, and we draw upon our memory to identify things and understand. One of the important aspects as a human is our desire to preserve ourselves. We call self-preservation. And for self-preservation, there are 4 components. That is our preservation to preserve ourselves, our ego, our self-cherishing nature, that we are important. And there is some biological basis for this, what is known in biology as a fight and flight mechanism. We will run away from danger. We will fight to protect our possessions and our loved ones. And the concept of preserving our life through the search of the necessities of life, which is the food. So another component is food, protection for ourselves in terms of shelter, and the reproduction. We are driven by the fact that we need to reproduce to maintain the survival of the species. So we have the motor-sensory component of the mind, the memory of the mind, the self, which is the ego and our preservation of ourselves. And the 4th and most important component of the mind is cognition, the ability to think. So there are 8 core features of cognition or metacognition. It is that knowing, the feeling, and the willingness, the drive, the motivation to keep going. It has got a conscious and a subconscious or unconscious component. So there's a conscious, unconscious, and subconscious. These are the things that drive us to our lives and what we do and how we react to society. So I'd like to go a little bit on this model that I have conceptualized, known as the information processing system of the brain. It is based on a particular model that is understood, which is also used in computer science, but I've modified it to the current understanding of cognitive neuroscience. And you will see that we obtain information from the 5 senses through our sensory motor systems of our brain, and from which we then identify data, and which we go back to memory, and from which we will then take certain aspects from our prior knowledge, and then we respond to that stimuli. Now, this stimulus can be from an external source or can be internal through a process of thoughts. When we think about a particular thought based on a past experience or a future that we are anticipating, it's a thought. So this stimulus has got a certain response. So what is that response? Some of the response is the motor response. The motor response is we get up and go, we run away from danger, we fight, we speak. So these are the motor response. But there is also what I call part of the motor response is called an emotional response. It's the feeling component. Now the emotion is a bi-modular concept. There is the neural concept of emotion, that is, there's certain portions of the brain that are responsible for certain emotions that it recognizes. This neural component then exhibits itself. That means it motorizes itself. That means it brings it to action through the release of chemicals. And this is called a neuroendocrine axis. So the various chemicals that release, that gives us that feeling, that how we feel as part of emotion. So that is the emotional component. And the other component of how we react to the stimulus is we create knowledge. And this is how we rearrange the facts based on what we see, we read, we think about it, and that is the process of metacognition where we learn. So learning, we learned a lot of this from the cognitive neuroscience, which was seen in some of the papers on learning. So when we look at what is the metacognition, what are the cognitive skills that the mind has, how do we think? Incidentally, cognition is also known as buddhi. So buddhi is a Sanskrit word for cognition. So there is, when we have attained all this information from the stimulus and from our thoughts, we can then give it attention. Sustained or sometimes inappropriate attention to a particular thought can lead to delusional states. We also can respond to these thoughts or stimulus. That response can be inhibited. That means a sudden knee-jerk reaction can be inhibited by cognition. So that's why sometimes somebody says something and we can shout out in anger, or we can think about it and say, all right, try to understand, empathize, and that's how our inhibition or response come to a higher function of the cognition. The speed at which we process information is again a cognitive function. Some people take a long time to process information, but there are certain techniques that we can use to rapidly process information so that we can appraise the situation and act appropriately. We have the ability to be flexible. Cognitive flexibility is another cognitive skill. The ability to be flexible, to be adaptive, and that is part of mastery and part of maturity. Then can we give multiple attention? So people say that we can do multitasking. Actually, the brain cannot function efficiently with multitask. That's when errors occurs and they produce a lot of discomfort. So, but some people have the ability to simultaneously do multiple tasks, and that is a level of professionalism and mastery that allows that to happen. The next thing is we have a working memory. That is the only small bits of data that we can manage at one time. And then how we then put this to memory is the process of categorization, how we categorize information into various processes that we can then remember and call back for our experiences in life. And the other ability is the ability to do pattern recognition. So sometimes this is what happens. So we profile people, we pattern recognize somebody dressed this way, behave this way, therefore he is this. And this can be right or wrong. So this is something that we have to be able to do properly in cognitive functions of the hand. So what it is that drives human. When I use man here, I mean the genderless thing of humans. So the needs are, as we talked about, the four needs: the food, the fight, the flight, and the desire to reproduction is what drives the biological drives. This is then compounded by certain other drives like survival, the legacy, our desire for leisure, family links, and the genetics, the ethnocentricities of individuals. This then results in the types of behavior that we exhibit. Another important thing to remember is conditioning. Now, this is the famous Pavlovian experience. This is how we experience life. And it's important to understand this so that we know why we are responding to a particular stimulus in a particular way. So Pavlov's dog, if we are all familiar with that experiment, If you ring a bell and then feed the dog, when you feed the dog salivates because he sees the food, he salivates. But if I rang a bell and then gave the food, I'm conditioning the dog to the bell. The next time, just by ringing the bell, the dog reacts by salivation. So this can be used positively and it can also be used negatively, or accidentally we use it. So sometimes when we smell something or we hear something, we react instantaneously, and that is partly due to Pavlovian conditioned reflex. So we need to understand why we are behaving this way or somebody else is behaving that way. Is partly due to this condition, and this can be unconditioned and unlearned. So a lot of behavioral things that we experience in our life is due to conditioning, and this is Pavlovian conditioning. The next thing is we need to look at our needs. So the hierarchy, there's a hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow summarized these things that I just mentioned into Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the basic needs, we need food, shelter, feeling of belonging, love, self-esteem, and the highest is self-actualization, where we find satisfaction in performing stuff for other people, the society needs, and that provides us with satisfaction. So this is another important concept which we come to later on how we find meaning in our life. Now we come to a concept sometimes hard for us to accept: pain and suffering. Pain is universal. Everybody in the world, all sentient beings, feel pain. When we are born, the child cries, which is important. The crying of the child represents the breath of life and the child's wellness. In fact, it's called an UPGA score that we do when a child is born. And in fact, the child doesn't cry. A slap is given on the buttocks to initiate pain so that the child will cry and breathe the air. So suffering is part of life. Now, the root cause of suffering, of pain, if you think about it very, very logically, is based upon desire. So as long as one desires, wants something, you will suffer. So because I want food, and if I don't have food, I feel hungry and I suffer. But the moment I have food, my hunger goes off, my suffering goes. But the secret to life without suffering, that's what we want. Sometimes it's not the happiness. Sometimes all we want is life without suffering. It's actually quite mathematical. If everyone suffers, the cause of suffering is desire. The removal of desire is the secret to a life of no suffering. And there are ways. There is a particular set of patterns and rules, which we will look at later, which helps us to live a life that is without desire. And one of the important things is the understanding our mind. Once we understand what I've just discussed in the last 15 minutes, then you realize that this is what my life is, my experience, and therefore I understand, and by understanding, I'm able to overcome that pain, the pain and suffering of life. There is this video that is in the QR code that you can watch. It's a video that I produced on the 8 ways to success. But when I say success, it's just not financial success, business success, or career success, but success in terms of life. Let's go to emotion. Everybody is familiar with Spock of Star Trek, logical man, doesn't put emphasis on emotion. What is emotion? We talked about just now, it's a motor response to the stimuli from my model that I described. So emotion, there are various kinds, there are 8 sets of emotions, 7, 8 sets. But basically there are 4 emotions: fear, anger, joy, and happiness. And these have been proven in various studies, and there are various centers in the brain that acknowledges these emotions. But the feeling, so emotion is a sensory state of the mind, but the feeling of that emotion is a chemical mediated response. And this has been proven. And it is important to understand what are the chemicals that produces these various states of emotion. So that is the physiological response to the neural pathways, which then can lead to a behavior, to an action. So if I'm frightened, the emotion of fear can result in anger, and I can demonstrate that by shouting, or I can run away, and that's that behavioral component. But that feeling is a chemical component. So the responses, the subjective feeling is based on the chemicals that are released that produces certain things. Heart rate going up, breathing going up, the dilatation of the pupil, the sweatiness. Now, all humans have a similar response to whatever stimulus that comes from the external or an internal stimulus from a thought process. But how we act upon it, how we respond to it chemically is dependent upon us. I can decide to react by undergoing certain processes in the mind. And that is a process of appraisal. We can appraise the situation, appraise the stimulus, and say, does it need this response? Do I need to scream? Do I need to shout? Do I need to jump up in jubilation? Or shall I be calm and accept why this is happening, understanding why this happens? And therefore, we can actually moderate and mediate emotion. So emotion, is it real? You can see that emotion is dependent upon the chemicals, that is dependent upon the thought, which can be mediated by cognition, which is the higher function of the brain. So you can create an emotive state, a feeling state, merely by a thought action. You can try this. Think of the most pleasant episode in your life. Getting your bachelor's degree with distinction, your family is there, you're on stage collecting your degrees, great feeling. And if you keep thinking about that, the whole process, you can release the hormones of good feeling, endorphins, and these produce this wonderful feeling called emotion. Also, at the same, you can think of a very negative thought when your teacher insulted you in public and you felt humiliated. Keep thinking it, give it an inappropriate attention over and over again. It secretes these negative hormones of cortisol, adrenaline. You get angry, you feel terrible, you feel miserable. And this chronic state of inappropriate attention to these negative thoughts can produce a chronic state of depression. So emotions are controlled by thoughts and neural stimuli, and may not be a true representation of reality. And so Spock may be right. So what is all got to do with health? So we're here about healthy aging. So spirituality, the understanding of the mind is very important. So it is our beliefs, what we believe in, our physiology. These are the things that produces the negative and the positive feelings that we have. And as we talked about, the chemical response to these thoughts and beliefs and feelings if released chronically, produces lifestyle diseases. Cortisol, which is hormone which is necessary for stress, that we can run away from danger, if released in excessive form, can paralyze us, can also lead to ulcers, can lead to hypertension, heart disease, and things of that sort. There are people who also say that some of the cancers that are produced is a result of stress, because the body's inherent ability to heal most disease is remarkable. And you'll find this in biology, the whole process, what we call the inflammatory response to trauma and disease. The final pathway is resolution. So the body has its ability to heal itself. The only thing the body has no ability is what we call senescence or death. There is a time in which it just collapses, but in everything else, it has the ability. And if we understand all this, this will lead to us to live a balanced life. And I think somebody else is talking about ikigai, which is the Japanese philosophy and concept of how we do what we love, what we are good at, what society needs, and that gives us the balance in life that makes us peaceful. So what philosophical systems you believe in? So I won't go into religion because that can be quite controversial and sensitive, even though I've practiced the 4 major religions, but I've learned from them some positive. I've also learned to be tolerant to people around us. And I think your belief system is important. So I tend to follow 2 philosophies, Stoicism and Epicureanism. So we love the pleasures of life, and there's nothing wrong enjoying the nice nasi lemak or the cheesecake or whatever that you enjoy. It's fine. It is when we have a preoccupation with it, inappropriate attention, inappropriate desire to want it over and over again, that it becomes abnormal and pathological and produces disease. So the denial of these pleasures, the Epicurean, the senses, is not really a way. If you can live without the senses, great. If it produces internal discord, produces conflict, and produces stress, oh, I love to eat, but I am not going to eat because I want to lose weight, produces frustration and lack of health. So, Stoicism is the other philosophy that I feel is very important. It is going back to the metacognition and how we think using cognitive functions. The response to a stimulus, be it internal or external stimulus, how we respond, overreacting, overjoyous, over anger, but living in a state of equilibrium. It exists. The universe is more random than we think it is. It is the randomness is part of thermodynamics. They call it entropy. And energy cannot be created and destroyed by moves one form to the other. As long as we understand this, we become stoic. So understanding the mind, understanding how society works, understanding how we respond, understanding the true nature of society, we then become more calm in our approach, and we therefore live life that is more peaceful. A little bit on the thermodynamics. We are all heat sensitive beings. We're dependent on temperature. And so the closest thing that is important for all humans, all life on earth as we know it, is the sun. The sun is crucial. It is the sun that maintains the life. The second most important thing in this universe is the plants for us. It is the plants with their chlorophyll, the green pigment that allows the conversion of solar energy into food energy through which we live. So this understanding is important, and we are in sync with our universe. Our circle of life is dependent upon the transformation of energy from one form to the other in our own life. We call this the oxidation cycle, the Krebs cycle. So we live, we move, we speak, we breathe, we need energy. We need a battery with energy. That energy is what I call the currency of life, is adenosine triphosphate, ATP. The samsara of life, the cycle of life, is we consume this ATP until this becomes adenosine monophosphate, it goes into diphosphate, ADP, and then we eat food so that it can charge this ADP to ATP, and then we use it up, and our cycle of life goes round and round. Understanding that helps us to understand life generally and how we ought to behave. I like to bring the concept, which I like very much, which influenced me in many ways, brought forward by Jiddu Krishnamurti, who spoke about this philosophy. Part of Stoicism, it is known as choiceless awareness. We need to be aware of our surroundings, aware of the stimulus, our response, our belief, our thought, why we are responding. Understanding this is crucial, but we don't need to make a judgment. Just be aware. Choiceless awareness is to understand what is happening, why is this there, and I'm not making a judgment. We are judgmental. The moment we make judgment, we are incurring suffering, incurring pain, because that judgment can lead to a lot of actions, including actions on our part in terms of our behavior. So judgment can be positive and can be negative. In healthcare, we make judgments every day. Some of it right, many a time wrong judgment. And there's a talk I gave about decision making in surgery. And it's important that the evidence that we have, I've got various qualities of evidence, and sometimes the evidence is not strong enough. So choiceless awareness is important. We are aware of our surroundings. Let us not make judgments. Somebody is eating food during fasting month. Who are we to judge? Maybe there is a reason. Maybe because he's had a gastrectomy that he's unable to not consume small amounts frequently. So there is a reason. So without understanding, making the judgment produces a lot of unnecessary conflicts, suffering, and consumption of energy. So the ability to observe without evaluation is a very high form of intelligence. So in that video I mentioned that you can watch, it summarizes the Eightfold Path towards living a successful life. So the first thing is you must have a right view in life. What is your view in life? And this is where I think your belief system, understanding the mind, the psychology is important. And from the right view, you must have the right intention. What is your intention in performing, doing, or thinking about something? From that intention comes speech. So speech is powerful, also destructive. So when I say powerful, it's both in a positive sense and in a negative sense. So sometimes it's better not to speak, more powerful. So that leads to speech. View, intention, speech. The speech usually leads to action. So what is the action that we want to do? So it is dependent on the three prerequisites: view, intention, speech, lead to action. That then leads to our way we live, our lives. Action leads to our lives, our livelihood, lives, what it is that we do. And these have got an impact in the way our universe is, in the way we experience life. And if you want something in life, be it good or bad, you need to put the effort behind it. So the effort requires a motor component, which is walking somewhere to go and study, wake up in the morning, go to school to learn something, or wake up, go to work, earn the money so you can feed the family. So that's an effort. But it also needs concentration. And this is a 60 recipe for success. You need to concentrate, focus, laser focus attention. I do microsurgery, and when I want to focus, I switch off the main operating light. And my assistant says, "Why are you switching off the main operating light?" I only have one light on the small area in which I'm operating. That's called laser focus. And that's what you need. And from that effort and concentration, you need what is known as mindfulness. So mindfulness is the process of being mindful of our environment, that awareness, that understanding of why things happen, being mindful, being grateful, having gratitude for that which is beyond in front of us. So when we have a bowl of nasi lemak, a plate of nasi lemak, not just gobbling it up, being mindful that somebody grew the rice, somebody cooked it, somebody spent that effort to cook it. Yes, I paid for it, but I must be grateful for somebody to enjoy that taste. Be grateful for that sensation, but don't be obsessed with it. And so that's that eightfold path to success. So what is that ideal for us from this concept, this philosophy to lead our life? So to me, I have this simple philosophy. So we are what we eat, they say. So you eat carefully, eat the right things, speak only when needed, speak the right things. The actions, the movements are important, so do the appropriate movement, the exercise. And to me, thinking is important. I learned to think only when I was age 40. When I did my MBA, I started to have critical thinking. Prior to that, we were thinking but more of a regurgitative. 5 causes of heart failure, memorize, say it, exam, pass the exam. That wasn't critical thinking. I think critical thinking is important. It's only later in life I learned. So we need to think about life. We need to think about why we are behaving, and then realize that the most important thing in life that we have control over is our thoughts. Every other phenomena in life, we have no control. And that is important to understand and realize that, because once we understand that I cannot control the environment, I cannot control the person in front of me, I cannot control the weather, but how I respond to that environment, to that phenomena, is within my control through my cognition. So being aware how I respond, I can make that appraisal and response. So thinking is very important. The other thing is learning. So there's a lot of studies that have been shown that learning new things keeps the brain active and can be one of the important factors in reduction of dementia. And that is why I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always learning new things. And learning easy things may not be as useful as learning difficult things. So what are difficult things to learn? That is challenge to your brain. We call that cognitive load. So to me, certain things are difficult to understand and visualize. And so I learn other things. The other thing is to be in a state of balance, equanimity. No need to overreact or underreact. Accept the stimuli, understand why this is happening. Nothing is against you, not the whole universe against you. Nothing is there created so that you are the most important person in the universe. As you look from the stars, you're just a small dot. But just accept that this is a phenomena, understand my response to it, inhibit the response, be in a state of balance, life becomes beautiful. One of the great joys in life is that of giving. Social enterprise are growing these days. And the ability to give to the others. Remember the hierarchy of needs that we talked about from Abraham Maslow's, that provides the ability for self-esteem. Anybody can give. You don't need to be rich to give. to give the act of service to somebody, we call the dharma, is an important, not only for society, but for yourself. I do a lot of volunteer work in the region, mainly to train surgeons in hand and microsurgery. And the reason I do it is more for my pleasure, because I enjoy doing this, and it incidentally also helps others who are in need. So the joy, the perception, the emotion of satisfaction that I get from doing such acts also benefits society. So the root motivation is still, it brings joy to me. I do it because I find it fun. It's great. It's wonderful. So they say that if you love what you do, you never work for the rest of your life. I love what I do. So understanding these concepts are therefore important for us to understand life. And this is what I mean about understanding life in itself. So if you look at, this is my take on the A, B, C, D, E, F of life. Now, it's just my belief, my philosophy. Life comes from the universe. The energy from the universe is condensed into a life form. We have the process of the egg and the sperm coming together, formation of an embryo, and life is formed. Somebody once said, a man is born, he suffers, and he dies. Suffering is universal. The moment we're born, we spend through life making choices, options. So you are born, A, from the universe, B, that's the birth, life from the universe, the energy, birth. C is the choice that you make through the whole process of life. And D is death. From death, energy returns to the universe. If you understand the law of thermodynamics, the electrons, the protons, the neutrons are recycled in the universe. That is life. That is undeniable. That's facts. Physics, quantum physics, thermodynamics. And they then get utilized back into the universe in another form. And in the process of living, we all like to leave a legacy. What is the legacy that we leave behind? It is the memory of others. We leave a legacy through our children. We leave a legacy to our society, the work that we have done in society. But in the whole spectrum of time, does it really mean anything? In my view, it really doesn't. But for that short period, from B, C, and D, birth, choice, death, we want to make that as meaningful, as peaceful. I like the word peace and bliss rather than happiness for ourselves. And to me, that secret is dependent upon our understanding of what life is, based on how our brain, our mind, the brain is the organ, the mind is the function of the brain, perceives our universe, perceives the phenomena that we are faced with on a day-to-day basis, perceives the reaction of our fellow humans, and how we respond to them. It is in our hands. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I hope I have stimulated your mind to think about yourself and to do something. I hope this is not just another lecture that you've been to. I hope that you go back and think critically. Thinking, as I said, is very important, about yourself. Where are you in life? Admit the shortcomings that you face. From the admission, there must be an acceptance of the deficiencies in your life. And then the desire to change. Desire, again, remember, is the root of all suffering. Change is painful. But you're willing to go through that path to reach a state in which you then have peace. Once you recognize these areas and recognize that there is a change that is needed, then you're on the path to that peaceful state of bliss. That, my dear friends, is spirituality. Thank you and good luck.